It was a night like any other. My friends and I had an assignment due the next day, a mock interview to prepare us for the real thing, where we'd have to interview a business owner. We chose to meet at the campus library. It was quiet, almost deserted, which felt perfect for focusing on the work. We set up in one of the small discussion rooms and started going over our lines, practicing questions and answers, trying to keep things light. But there was something strange in the air that night. We couldn't put a finger on it, but it felt like we were being watched. The silence around us didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on us. We brushed it off as nerves and kept going. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my friend's phone, which we'd set up as a camera, switched from the front camera to the back on its own. No one touched it. We looked at each other, half laughing, thinking it was just a glitch. But that laughter quickly faded when we heard a distinct, sharp knock on the door. I went over to the door and peeked outside. Nothing. The hallway was completely empty. "Must have been the wind," I said, trying to keep things normal, even though the doors were heavy and there was no draft in the building. We got back to work, but it was hard to focus. A few minutes later, my friend nudged me and whispered, "Did you see that?" I followed her gaze, and she pointed towards the far end of the library. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, in the dim light between the shelves, I saw a small figure, a little boy, running down the aisle. I shook my head, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but my friend was pale, frozen, and I could tell she had seen it too. Did you just see a kid?" I asked. She nodded, wide-eyed. Trying to shake off the unease, we went back to the table, hoping if we ignored whatever was happening, it would leave us alone. But the unsettling feeling only grew. That's when my other friend pointed out something even weirder. There was a cleaner in the library, someone we'd seen when we first arrived. He was pushing a mop back and forth, slowly and methodically. But he was still there, hours later, cleaning the exact same spot over and over. He didn't look up, didn't even seem to notice us, just kept scrubbing that same spot on the floor, like he was stuck on an endless loop. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Everything felt wrong. We packed up our things in silence, not saying out loud what we were all thinking. We needed to get out of there. We decided we'd had enough. We packed up our things in silence, all of us feeling the same urge to leave without saying it out loud. But as we were zipping up our bags, the silence was shattered by a loud bang. It echoed through the library, reverberating off the walls. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, or maybe even been thrown right outside our discussion room. We froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. None of us dared to open the door to see what had made the noise. My heart was pounding, and I could feel a cold sweat prickling on my forehead. We didn't need any more convincing. It was time to go. We scrambled to gather our things, moving as fast as we could. As we stumbled out of the discussion room and into the hallway, I couldn't resist glancing back one last time. The janitor was still there, still mopping that same spot, as if nothing had happened, as if we weren't even there. It was like he was trapped in his own endless, silent world. We rushed down the hallway, past the dark aisles and towering shelves, not daring to look back. The air felt thick and heavy, pressing down on us, almost pushing us out of the library. We barely spoke as we exited the building, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of what we had experienced. The next day, we shared our story with a few classmates, expecting them to laugh or brush it off. But to our surprise, several of them had their own strange stories. Some had heard whispers and footsteps late at night. Others had felt cold spots or seen flickering lights, and a few even claimed to have seen the same little boy wandering the library, always out of reach, disappearing before anyone could get a closer look. We eventually worked up the courage to ask the librarian about it. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she looked more resigned than anything. "That's why I tell students to be careful if they stay late," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The library has history. It's best not to disturb it." The next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Every time I walked by the library, I felt as though a pair of unseen eyes were watching me from within, peering through the windows or hiding just behind the shadows. My friends felt it too. We all kept our distance from the building, avoiding it whenever we could. But at night, lying in bed, I'd find my mind drifting back to that little boy in the shadows, the cleaner stuck in his endless routine, and the strange silence that had wrapped itself around us like a shroud. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to go back to the library during the day, hoping the sunlight would make the place feel less intimidating. I wanted answers, wanted to know if we had really seen what we thought we did, or if it had all been some kind of shared hallucination, an effect of stress and late-night exhaustion. My friends refused to join me, and I couldn't blame them. So, I went alone. As I walked through the library's doors, the usual hum of students and rustle of bookshelves felt oddly comforting, almost grounding. Everything seemed normal at first, just an ordinary library filled with people going about their day. But as I wandered deeper, I felt a growing unease. The air grew colder, and the noises seemed to fade away. It was as if I had stepped into a different world entirely, where time moved slower, where reality itself was somehow warped. I found myself drawn toward the same aisle where we had seen the little boy. I stood there, staring down the row of books, half expecting to see him peeking out from behind a shelf, just as he had that night. But the aisle was empty. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe it had all just been a trick of the mind. But then, I noticed something odd. The floor, where the cleaner had been scrubbing that night, looked different. The tiles were dull and scuffed, the grout darkened and cracked. It was as if they had never been cleaned, despite the hours we'd seen him mopping that same spot. A chill ran down my spine as I crouched to get a closer look, my heart pounding. And that's when I saw it. Faint, almost imperceptible. But there, the outline of a small handprint pressed into the dust and grime. My heart skipped a beat as I reached out, hovering my fingers over it. It was too small to be an adult's, too small to belong to anyone but a child. That night changed everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that something from the library had stuck with me, always just out of sight. Even at home, every shadow seemed darker. Every little sound felt like it was calling my name. Sometimes, I'd catch what looked like a small figure moving in my peripheral vision, disappearing when I'd turn to look. The library started showing up in my dreams, too. I'd be wandering through those dark aisles, feeling like something was watching. And just before I'd wake up, I'd hear it. A faint voice, like a child, saying, "Help me."